of my sitting spots are covered in sun, and I don't really want to wear this hat. It's more of a windscreen. Here we go. So I've been asked here and there over time as people discovered my Zen Buddhist background, which I think they figured out mainly because of the hairline, or because whenever something important comes up, I tend to drop it in there like a badge I'm wearing. 3 years in the Zen Center, bump it. And people in the West, they don't know about Buddhism, they don't know about Zen, they don't know what it's all about, and I get the question occasionally, you know, what do you believe? Which is interesting. I believe that cars passing in the background make noise, and I'll have to wait. What do you believe is kind of a cool question because it's coming from this community, and this community, for whatever reason, is very scientific. We just kind of tend toward sort of an atheistic stance, you know? I believe in gravity, and what the hell else should I believe in? Once upon a time I believed in Newtonian physics, but not anymore. The question is really, what about Zen, what about Buddhism, and what about you? Believe something that can't be seen, or measured, or algebraically reverse engineered. I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out. And I like the question, but I also like the inverse of the question, which is like, what don't you believe? Because one of the things that I don't believe in is a just world. That doesn't exist. We don't live in a just world. Things don't happen to people because they deserve it, they just happen. Which, now that I think of it, seems like it opposes the basic concept of karma in Buddhism, which is that, you know, what goes around comes around. Whatever sort of energy you generate is the energy that's going to be reflected back upon you. Which I also believe, not because I have to believe it, but because I know it's true, because I'm alive and, you know, I've experienced cars passing by. That's the karma of sitting at this park bench. Really, to me, karma is just thermodynamics. There's no reason to question or challenge it, because if you've ever bounced a rubber ball against a wall, then you've seen it in action. The conservation of energy. Something in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Whatever kind of energy that you generate and that you put out into the universe is going to be the kind of energy that comes back at you in one shape or another. Positivity breeds positivity, negativity breeds negativity. You're walking around scowling at everyone, not because you feel bad, but just because that's, you know, a face you've decided to make, you're not gonna get a lot of, like, happy people saying, "Hi, how are ya?" More so, you're gonna get people crossing the street because they see you sitting on a park bench talking to yourself, hi, and they don't want to have anything to do with that weirdo. So I believe in karma, but karma isn't really supernatural, but I also don't believe in the fallacy of a just world, which would seem to be tied up with karma. Maybe it is a little bit, but I feel like karma then needs to have its legs swept out a little bit, because the truth is that things don't always happen for reasons. I mean, if you go back far enough, yeah, everything has a reason. Thermodynamics, the continuing of the boulder rolling down the hill that caused other pebbles to move, and a rhino sneezes in Africa, and butterflies in North America take a poop, and then I step in them, and now I'm scraping them off my shoe. Butterfly is the stinkiest of the poops. But where karma could be confused for the idea that we live in a just world, all you have to do is think about, I don't know, slavery, the Holocaust, any tragedy. Did those people deserve that? No. So if it's a just world, where did the system break down? And the answer is simple. The system didn't break down. You've just imbued the system with something that doesn't exist, which is the idea that people get what they deserve. And that is a nice bedtime story to tell to your kids. You know, if you work hard and do everything that you possibly can do, and you're out there every day, you know, pounding the pavement, you will succeed. But the truth is, no, you won't. Or at least it doesn't guarantee success. You're still making a purchase of a lotto ticket. Every day that you're out there pounding the pavement, or trying to break into whatever industry you want to get into, or trying to make money if that's your goal, or trying to find love, every time you throw the die, it's another chance for a car to drive by. It's another chance for things to work out in your favor, but it is a chance. It is luck. Working hard does not equal succeeding. And in fact, if you want to be guaranteed success, don't work hard, don't work smart, work shady, work deviously. That is a lotto ticket that always pays out. Not always, but far more often. I mean, just look at, you know, anything. Negativity breeds negativity. Okay, okay. So as much as I believe in karma, I do not believe in justice. Which is weird to say. The universe itself is ambivalent toward our existence, toward man, toward our ideas of justice and judgment and what's good and what's bad. It just doesn't care. So we might think that, you know, working hard should result in acquiring goods and public acclaim. But the universe's take on the matter is more, fire is pretty. It just don't care is what I'm saying. But as a Buddhist, as a Zen Buddhist, what do I believe in that's supernatural? All right, we're gonna get down to it, because there's really just one core thing that I believe in that you might say, well, that doesn't sound very scientific. To which you would be wrong, but we'll get to that. I believe in universal consciousness. Yeah, that sounds pretty hippy-dippy. I believe that consciousness exists in the grain of sand and the blade of grass and in absolutely everything, right down to man-made, you know, what did we come up with today? Well, we created a new particle. Oh, okay. Is there consciousness imbued in that particle? Yes. Because when I say universal consciousness, I don't mean that the grain of sand has a consciousness of its own. I mean that the grain of sand resonates at the frequency of consciousness, which is ever-present and universal. It exists in every mote, every essence, every fiber of the universe at all points. And that is how we find ourselves as we are, where we are, how we are. When I was younger, and I want to say sort of tween age, it had already become a thing in my mind, the idea that maybe the way that the universe works is that whoever gets there first gets to define what it is. Which is a weird notion for my, like, 13-year-old self to have had, but that's what I was thinking back then. I mean, it makes for an excellent explanation for all the, like, mythological stories and King Arthur and Merlin and wizardry and that kind of stuff, because before someone came along to sort of tighten down the clamps on what is allowed to happen in our reality, well, wizardry was very popular. Then those damn scientists came along and ruined it all, and now things have to make sense. But I liked this idea, and I like now that I had that idea back then. I think it's not actually far off of what I believe today. That universal consciousness is kind of my shorthand for expressing the existence of will in the universe, with or without we sentient beings. For a long time, I had a problem with evolution, and my problem with evolution was that it just didn't seem to make sense. When I looked out on the world and saw animals and insects and life and the behaviors of these creatures on the face of the planet, it was like, no, I don't care how many billions of years and how big the melting pot is, just no. I think the first thing that bothered me was birds making nests, and it was like, how does a bird just naturally know how to make a nest? I'm a human being, I have a brain, I don't know how many times the size of a bird's, but relatively speaking, I mean, my brain, you give me an hour to make a nest, I'm not gonna have one done because I'm gonna try and like weave it together, it's not gonna stick together, and me, I've got opposable thumbs and all these digits. How does the bird ever even figure that out, or figure out that that's a better way to live, or decide that it's going to build that? It bothered me, okay? I can explain it away now, but it bothered younger me. And then I started thinking about spiders, because spiders are way more complex than birds, and not simply because they make these geometric patterns out of their webs. They happen to, by the random chance of evolution, have the pattern in their brain in order to make the web, and by the way, they use the web in order to hunt, in order to feed, and so if there was at some point that they didn't make a web, then they had to be doing something else to eat, and if there was at some point that they had the pattern of the web in their head, but they didn't have the silk-making ability in their buttholes, you see where I'm going with this. Honestly, no. Something about buttholes? And then I learned about, I think it's the bombardier beetle, and the bombardier beetle has two chemicals, one highly acidic and one highly basic, and then it happens to have these two spouts also at its butthole. I know. And it uses its dual-butthole spout in order to pump these chemicals out of itself in an arc so that the two streams do not cross until they get significantly far enough away from the bombardier beetle that it doesn't blow itself up, but that it can blow other things up. And evolutionarily speaking, I'm sitting here thinking, how does something evolve that has these two chemicals in it and not in the random cauldron of evolution just accidentally blow itself out of being a species before it ever gets to the point of developing spouts, and then before it ever gets to the point of the spouts being controllable and its mind being able to do reverse math and decide where to cross the beams. And this is just the tip of the iceberg on crazy things that exist in nature. There is a wasp that implants the larva of its young into the stomach of a spider, and then that spider has its brain rewritten because there's a parasite in what the wasp stabs it with that mind controls the spider into making a web that turns into like a chrysalis for the larva that it's just implanted into the stomach of of the spider. But by the way, the spider creates a chrysalis in a certain shape that is something that scares off the natural predators, not of the spider, but of the wasp. And you and Darwin sit there saying, well, if you give it 1 billion years and all the possibilities in the world, you just end up with this stuff. And I say, no. And I know what this sounds like, but just stay with me here, because I get that it does happen, that it can happen in baby steps, in little increments over time. One little thing changes and another little thing changes, and this is more successful, and then you stack that on top of it. I get the whole premise, but I look out at the world and I say, what we have right now, we do not have without will. It doesn't require a creator's consciousness that is controlling and that decides it and that wriggles its nose like Samantha from Bewitched and just pops giraffes into existence. But it does require more than just random chance. I do not believe that you can roll a random number generator that many times and come up with mind-controlling parasitic wasps. I believe that the way you get to mind-controlling parasitic wasps involves the will of the wasp, involves the wasp's desire to reproduce and to protect its young. I believe that a spider in its head has a natural construction that just speaks to it in geometric shapes, but I don't believe that the spider would have just naturally come up with a web to weave without its will to turn those geometric shapes into something real. Everything is imbued with this, and not because it's been given it, but because it exists in the emptiness of existence. It is everywhere. It is the web upon which all life and all non-life and all medium life takes place. And this is my personal view of something that has a lot to do with Buddhism and with Zen. Zen very often talks about this existence that we know being a dream state that we will awaken from at some point, and the reason that it says it that way is because a dream is something that ends. It doesn't persist, it doesn't go on forever, and this life ends. But Zen also recognizes something that is not merely temporary and not merely a dream state, something that does exist and does go on and is always there and ever present and universal and infinite, and that is the emptiness. The emptiness into which everything emerges and everything collapses back again. And within this emptiness, there is something more going on than simply thermodynamics. And as simple and surface level as my little evolution rant carries on, this has a lot to do with quantum mechanics for me. Because I naturally graduated from simply questioning evolution and started questioning the nature of existence itself. If you've never heard of the double slit experiment, then please look it up, because almost anyone who speaks on the matter will give you a better explanation than I do. But basically, scientists were concerned and interested and a little bit what the hell about the way that light behaves. Because when they cut two little slits in a hard piece of cardstock and then shone a light from behind it and projected it onto a wall, instead of seeing two like rectangular areas where the light is coming through and then a gradation of darkness around it, what they saw was a wave-like pattern that shouldn't really have been there. The wave patterns on the wall in the double slit experiment resemble what would occur if you took two small pebbles and dropped them into a still surface of a pond at the same time. Bloop. You get the concentric rings that come out and then they cross over and then they start to interfere with each other, and you get a more and more complex pattern. And the reason they're thinking that isn't quite right, is because we conceived of light as being made of photons, of particles, and light traveling in rays, which means you start at a source and you head off in a direction and you are not diverged from that direction until you bump into something or reflect off of it or are absorbed by it. So in comes this experiment, and the idea of the experiment is we're going to track the individual photons in the light to figure out where they start and where they end, and then we can try and determine like what happened in the middle. So in what is probably a gross simplification of the actual study and the technology that they used in order to measure this stuff, I'm gonna say imagine that they built a sensor wall. A wall that is just made of tiny little sensors like you'd have on an old television. And when light hits it, it lights up a sensor, and then the sensor knows, okay, that's where that particular photon hit the wall. And with this sensor wall, now we can track where the photons are landing and start to make a real study of this odd behavior of light. So, everybody turns the lights off in the room, they turn on the light source behind it, and they see that pattern on the wall, right? The wavy one, like two pebbles being dropped into a still lake. And then, scientist A says to scientist B, ready? And scientist B says to scientist A, throw the switch. switch, and click, the sensor wall goes on, and as quickly as the sensor wall goes on, suddenly that wave pattern of shadows on the wall disappears. Immediately what is on the wall is what was expected in the first place, which is like two rectangular areas where the light is coming through and then a falling off of shadow. And simultaneously both scientists poop their pants, and then scientist B says to scientist A, turn it back off. And he turns it off, and boom, you get the wave pattern again. So they spend the next 16 hours or so sitting in the room flipping the light switch on and off, going, oh my God, are you seeing this? I'm seeing this. This is crazy, right? This is crazy. And what they discovered there, regardless of whether you know anything about quantum mechanics or not, is something that you've heard before, which is that light behaves either as a photon or a wave, circumstance depending. But that doesn't really tell a layman much, because what do you mean that light behaves as a wave? And what is meant, and this is important, what is meant that light behaves as a wave is that light behaves as a collection of all its possibilities. Given the source that the light started at and the place that it's going to end up, it has a lot of possibilities of where it could land, and what was discovered that day is that if no one is looking too hard, the universe prefers not to decide where the photon lands. This is the important part. Shut up. The universe prefers not to do its algebra homework. It doesn't want to show its math. It wants to leave things fuzzy and undefined, and the only reason why light behaved as a photon when they flipped on the sensor wall is because they were observing it. Because human beings had gone to the trouble of creating technology capable of measuring individual photons from source to destination. And that is amazing, because that implies that if the universe never pooped out humans, and humans never pooped out a sensor wall, if this planet were covered in squirrels, the universe would never have been forced to show its math. And it wouldn't have, because it prefers not to do its math when it doesn't have to. Our consciousness, at the level that it is, forces the universe to conform to it. Those waves of light's possibility would not have resolved to a photon for cavemen. They would only resolve to the level of consciousness and self-awareness and intellect that humanity had risen to. And that tells us that we really do shape the universe, and not just us, but everything. Every source of consciousness decides what flavor of universe we get today. Before there was humans, before there was an Earth, we have no idea how loosey-goosey the nature of reality truly was. We look through our telescopes and see the light from trillions of years ago, and we tell ourselves that's how it really was back in the days of the Big Bang. But the double slit experiment seems to imply that the universe didn't decide what it was like back in the days of the Big Bang until consciousness emerged that was advanced enough to demand to know. And now we live in a world where quantum computing is being developed based on these principles, where basically instead of sending ones and zeros across the data pipe, you're sending Schrodinger's box across the data pipe. And you don't know what's inside it, you just know that there's a question and you want it answered, and you shove it through the pipe, and then on the other side you open it up and you get to find out whether the cat was dead or not all along. Yeah, now you've really lost me. I know, this has gotten weird. This has gotten very weird, and it seemed to be going in one direction, then went in another direction, and I'm sure it sounds like I'm cherry-picking pieces of information and throwing together a philosophy out of it, and probably because I am. Universal consciousness is the true background radiation. It is that which exists in the emptiness. It is the source of creation. It is the source of inspiration. It is the source of you and me, of which we are not created by it and we are not controlled by it. We are merely tuning forks resonating at the frequency of universal consciousness, and it is manifesting a certain variety, a certain shape, a certain form that it takes through us because of the shape of our fork. I am not this small self that resides purely in this body. I am not my toenails and my hair. I am not this voice. I am not these thoughts and these ideas. I am everything, everywhere. What I truly am is that emptiness, that will that exists in the space between spaces. And so are you, and so is everything. And you ask me what I believe in, and I say universal consciousness, and you might want to follow up with, do you believe in God? And I think the only fair answer is to say, yes. Because what better word does humanity have to describe a universal consciousness that exists everywhere at all times, is active within us, without us, that blurs the line between internal and external, and that we can never cease to be a part of? Not a creator God, not a God that lives in the heavens, not a God with a beard, but a God that is a radiating source of all existence, of all reality, a God that everything is, which I guess makes it not so much a God. You ask me what I believe? I believe that you are God, and I am God, and I am wearing this God. Sitting out underneath lovely God, with a nice God overhead, smell of God in the air. I am the Ronin God. Oh, I've got plans with God next God's Day. Pawn out.